Imagine, just for a second, putting on a completely opaque blackout blindfold.
Like the kind where you really cannot see even a tiny sliver of light coming in.
Right, exactly. Like zero light from the edges. It is just total sensory-depriving pitch black.
Complete darkness.
Yeah. So now, with that blindfold securely fastened to your head, imagine reaching out, picking up a printed book, and just reading it.
Which, I mean, sounds completely impossible.
It does. Or, casually sorting a pile of differently colored objects on a table in front of you.
Oh.
Or navigating a room without bumping into the furniture.
Yeah, doing all of this while being entirely blocked from seeing anything with your physical eyes.
Exactly. Somehow, you are still perceiving the visual world around you. And I want you, listening to this, to ask yourself, if you found out your own perception wasn't entirely limited to your eyeballs, what would you even do with that?
I mean, it sounds completely like science fiction.
Oh, absolutely.
Or a really, really well-executed magic trick designed to just sell tickets. But, when you dive into the actual mechanics behind what you're describing, it challenges almost every foundational assumption we have about how human senses actually operate.
Because we think of them in boxes, right?
Exactly. We tend to think of our senses as these rigid, hardwired, independent channels. The eyes see the light, the ears hear the sound, the skin feels the touch, and they never cross streams.
The classic five senses model.
Yeah. But the reality of human perception is turning out to be much more fluid than, say, a high school biology textbook would suggest.
And that fluidity is exactly what we are getting into today, because we are exploring a stack of sources centered around a really comprehensive informational booklet for a program called MindSee.
Right, MindSee.
And MindSee is this structured training program that teaches something they refer to as blindfold vision.
Which is quite a term.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore this wild, but honestly, incredibly structured concept. We want to unpack the science-informed foundations they use to explain it and trace the history and the ongoing clinical research behind human perception.
Yeah, we're looking at what actually happens when you systematically try to train the human brain to see without seeing.
Which requires a pretty total redefinition of what vision actually is in this context.
It really does. Because the MindSee text defines blindfold vision as the ability to perceive basic informational inputs. Things like geometric shapes, colors, spatial cues, and even reading text, all while wearing a blindfold.
Right.
But I think the most important thing to establish right up front is what this program insists it is not.
Yes, because my mind, and probably your mind listening to this, immediately jumps to, comic book superpowers.
Oh, for sure. Daredevil, right.
Exactly.
But the program is incredibly clear on this point, just to dispel any mysticism. This is not magic.
Not magic, got it.
Right. It is not a supernatural ability. It's not mind reading, telepathy, hypnosis, or, some sort of stage parlor trick.
So they frame this entirely as an educational training program.
Yes, exactly. They claim it is a trainable perceptual skill that relies on the natural architecture of the brain, not a medical treatment or some paranormal gift.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because calling it an educational training program sort of implies anyone can take the class and pass.
Right.
And the sources actually mention their success rate is in the high 90th percentile. And I have to call a timeout right there.
It sounds like a massive claim.
It does. If 90% of people could literally learn to read a book while wearing a blindfold, this would be the biggest news in human history.
It would be everywhere.
Every pilot, every surgeon, every driver would be taking this course. So how are they defining success here? Because I am highly skeptical that 9 out of 10 people are suddenly walking around seeing through blindfolds.
Well, that skepticism is exactly where most adults start, and it is a completely valid reaction. I mean, it's natural.
Good, I'm not crazy.
Not at all. But the catch is in how MindSee actually defines progress and success. They repeatedly emphasize that achieving full, vivid, blindfold vision is not guaranteed for anyone.
Okay, so it's not a promise.
Right. But they consider the program a success if a participant develops the underlying neurological prerequisites.
The prerequisites.
Yeah. So even if someone never achieves the ability to see a color through the blindfold, the training forces them to develop profound focus, deep emotional calmness, and incredibly clear mental imagery.
Oh, I see. So it's not a binary pass or fail on, like, reading a book.
Exactly. The visual phenomena, if they happen, are treated almost as a byproduct of achieving a highly regulated, deeply focused state of mind.
So the skill they are actually teaching is internal regulation. And the blindfold is basically just like a heavy-duty resistance band for your attention.
That's a great way to put it.
It feels a bit like learning how to wiggle your ears.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
You know how some people can just do it effortlessly and others can't even get them to twitch?
All right, they just stare in the mirror trying so hard.
Yeah, but the physical muscle and the neural pathway to wiggle your ears have always been there, just buried in your head. You just have absolutely no idea how to isolate it or send the signal.
Because you've never used it.
Right. It requires this hyper-specific internal focus to finally activate a connection that has literally existed since you were born.
And what's fascinating here is how that ear-wiggling analogy aligns perfectly with their use of the blindfold.
How so?
Well, people assume the blindfold is a prop for performance, purely there to prove to an audience that you can't see.
Like a magician showing his empty hands.
Exactly. But in this training, the blindfold is just a functional tool. Because human beings are incredibly visually dominant. Our eyes monopolize a massive percentage of our brain's processing power.
Oh, for sure. We're very visual creatures.
Right. We are constantly scanning for threats, reading faces, processing screens. So by putting on the blindfold and temporarily resting the eyes, you shut down that overwhelming fire hose of sensory input.
Which frees up bandwidth.
Exactly. It artificially lowers the background noise in your brain, which allows the participant's attention to naturally turn inward.
Okay, I follow that. But taking away visual noise doesn't magically create a new signal. I get that the brain is quieter, but how is it physically acquiring the shape of a letter or the color of a card without an eyeball to capture the light waves?
Right, where's the data coming from?
Yeah. What mechanism is MindSee leaning on here?
Well, to understand that, you have to think of the human brain as a dark, completely silent box locked inside your skull.
Okay.
The brain itself has absolutely no direct access to light or sound. All it ever receives are electrical signals zipping down nerve fibers.
Oh, right, because it's encased in bone.
Exactly. It doesn't inherently know if an electrical pulse came from a photoreceptor in your eye or a mechanoreceptor in your fingertip. It just processes the incoming data.
That is wild to think about.
It is. And since we already know the brain is highly plastic and can form new connections, MindSee relies on a phenomenon called cross-modal perception.
Wait, cross-modal perception. So it's like a city grid during a massive blackout. The visual cortex is this huge power station that suddenly has no demand because the eyes are closed.
Right.
So the brain reroutes that extra processing power to the smaller stations, like the ears and the skin, drastically upgrading their capacity to process spatial information.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. Cross-modal perception is when information typically acquired by one sense gets routed to and interpreted through another sensory channel's processing center.
So it's literally rewiring on the fly.
Yes. The brain is a massively interconnected web. Under the right conditions, it can take subtle data coming in from auditory or tactile pathways and route it straight to the visual cortex.
That's incredible.
And furthermore, the booklet notes that visualization and mental imagery activate the exact same neural networks used in actual physical perception.
Wait, really? The same networks?
Yes. When you vividly imagine a green apple in your mind's eye, your visual cortex lights up on a brain scan in a way that is remarkably similar to when you are staring at a physical green apple on a table.
Oh, wow. So if humans can truly use cross-modal perception to build a visual map without their eyes, are we essentially talking about a human version of echolocation?
Like a bat.
Yeah, like a bat navigating a cave.
Well, human echolocation is a very real, well-documented form of cross-modal perception.
Where blind individuals use tongue clicks to map their environment, right?
Exactly. The sound waves bounce back, and their visual cortex builds a spatial map.
Fascinating.
But MindSee seems to be pointing towards something even broader and more subtle than acoustic bouncing. They aren't teaching people to click their tongues.
No.
No, they are teaching attention regulation. The absolute prerequisite for this cross-modal rerouting to work, according to the text, is a deeply internally regulated nervous system.
Because if you're stressed, you can't focus.
Right. If you are stressed, your brain is in survival mode. It relies on its most habitual, dominant pathways. But when the nervous system is profoundly calmed, the brain becomes flexible enough to start interpreting incredibly subtle, non-visual data streams that it normally filters out as background noise.
Okay, so if forcing a massive reroute of sensory bandwidth requires this intense, relaxed focus, How do you actually train someone to do that?
It takes time.
I mean, I can't just sit down in a chair, demand my brain to be calm, and suddenly experience cross-modal perception.
No, definitely not.
And MindSee outlines their method in 4 distinct stages, and it honestly surprised me how slow the buildup is.
Yeah, the progression is very methodical. In fact, the first 2 stages have absolutely nothing to do with wearing blindfolds.
No blindfolds at all.
None. Stage 1 is entirely about attention and coherence. The goal here is establishing the baseline state that supports advanced learning.
Just getting calm.
Exactly. A participant might spend their time practicing heart rate variability exercises, deep diaphragmatic breathing, and mindfulness techniques, just to learn how to consciously shift their nervous system out of a stress response.
You have to build the foundation before you can build the house.
Precisely. And then stage 2 is activation.
Activation of what?
This is where the booklet details exercises focusing on visualization and internal sensing. It's not about seeing the outside world yet. It's about activating the inner world.
So more imagination stuff.
Yeah. A participant might practice holding the vivid image of a complex object in their mind, rotating it, zooming in on the texture. They're essentially working out that visual cortex muscle from the inside out.
Okay, I see. So they are deliberately laying down the neural tracks.
Yes, by strengthening the brain's ability to generate strong mental imagery. They are prepping the visual cortex to receive new types of data.
It's like spending weeks just learning how to breathe properly and how to float before you are ever allowed to try swimming a lap. You have to master the environment of the water first.
I love that analogy. And by the time they reach stage 3, which is blindfolded perception, the participant already has the internal tools to stay calm and focused when the lights go out.
And that's when they finally introduce the blindfold.
Yes, finally. But they don't start by handing you a novel to read.
No, that would be too much.
Right, they start with fine motor skills and simple binary choices. Like, can you sort a red block from a blue block? Can you trace the outline of a large triangle?
Just tiny baby steps to build confidence.
Exactly. As the brain begins to trust the cross-modal input, they gradually expand to gross motor skills like tossing a ball or navigating around a chair. And then finally, stage 4 is integration and expansion, taking this newly developed self-trust, mental flexibility, and resilience and applying it to everyday life stress.
But you know, the timeline for moving through those 4 stages is completely dependent on who the participant is. The sources detail a fascinating demographic split between how children experience this training versus adults.
Yes, the differences in approach are really stark, entirely because of the neurobiology and psychology of aging.
Kids just have an advantage
A
here.
huge one. For children, the program is designed around pure play, safety, and imagination. Children naturally learn through games.
And their brains are just more sponge-like.
Yeah, exactly. They're at peak plasticity.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they haven't spent 3 or 4 decades hardwiring the concrete belief that seeing without eyes is physically impossible.
Right. You hand a kid a blindfold and say, we're going to try to feel colors today. And the kid is just like, cool, a new game, let's do it.
Exactly.
But adults, we come with so much baggage.
An immense amount of cognitive baggage. The text specifically outlines the severe roadblocks adults face in this training.
Like what?
Well, we have developed strong analytical thinking, deeply ingrained habits of constant self-evaluation, heavy skepticism, and complex emotional histories with failure.
So true.
An adult puts on a blindfold in stage 3, and their internal monologue immediately fires up right. Am I doing this right? Is this real? What if I fail and look foolish? Am I making this up?
So what does this all mean? Why does that specific kind of internal pressure completely ruin the process?
Because of the stress.
It reminds me of trying to fall asleep when you have an early flight the next day.
Oh, the worst.
If you lie in bed and actively force yourself to sleep, if you say, I must sleep right now, why aren't I sleeping, I'm losing time, the sheer anxiety of trying to force the outcome makes it literally impossible to achieve.
Yep, you're wide awake.
The more you grasp at it, the further away it gets. You have to create the conditions for sleep, let go, and then let it happen to you.
That sleep mechanism is identical to what happens here. Seeking constant proof or forcing the outcome introduces performance anxiety.
And anxiety is the enemy of focus.
Exactly. Performance anxiety instantly triggers the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Heart rate goes up, cortisol spikes.
And the brain stops rerouting.
Right.
Right.
The moment a participant, whether it's a child or an adult, feels they are being evaluated or judged, that relaxed, coherent brain state required for cross-modal routing shatters. The perceptual skill simply shuts down.
Which is why the rules for parents and caregivers in the program are so incredibly strict.
They are uncompromising.
Parents must be supportive observers and absolutely nothing more. The environment has to feel completely neutral. There is no testing. There is no quizzing the child on the car ride home.
Right. You can't hold up her shirt and say, "What color is this? Prove to me the class is working."
Because the process has to be prioritized over the results.
Yes, the moment the child feels their love or validation is tied to their ability to perform the skill, the stress blocks the very neural pathways they are trying to open.
It's so counterintuitive to how we usually educate in the modern world. I mean, we are entirely built around testing, grading, and proving competence.
We really are.
But this concept of non-visual perception isn't just some new alternative educational trend. The sources trace the curiosity around this idea back incredibly far.
They do. The timeline provided in the booklet shows this is a really persistent human curiosity. Ancient cultures across the world had symbolic references to perceiving beyond physical sight.
Usually tied to practices involving total darkness, stillness, and disciplined meditation.
Exactly. Now, the text is careful to frame those as historical expressions rather than, peer-reviewed proof.
Right.
But the modern documented investigation really kicked off in 1924 with a book called Eyeless Sight by a French writer named Jules Romains.
And he claimed to have taught blindfolded individuals to perceive letters and numbers, which obviously sparked a massive debate.
Oh, a huge debate. It pushed the discussion into the Western scientific sphere. By the mid-20th century, organized curiosity grew.
Right, the Soviets got involved.
Yeah, the Soviet Union heavily funded wide-ranging investigations into what they termed dermo-optical perception.
Dermo-optical, meaning the skin acting like an eye.
Essentially, yes. The hypothesis that the skin itself possessed photoreceptor capabilities to perceive light or color. And while their methodologies varied wildly and the interpretations were fiercely debated, it proved that state-level scientific bodies were taking the concept seriously.
But the real shift, the moment this moved from, fringe curiosity into rigorous, heavily scrutinized modern science, seems to be the 1970s at Stanford University.
That was definitely the watershed era. In the 1970s, two physicists, Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff, conducted a series of remote viewing experiments at the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI.
Okay, and how did they test it?
Well, their methodologies were incredibly strict. They would place a receiver in an isolated, electromagnetically shielded room.
Total isolation.
Yes. A sender would travel to a randomly selected remote geographic location. And at a specific time, the receiver in the locked room had to draw or describe the location the sender was visiting, relying purely on non-local perception.
And the mind-blowing part is that their findings weren't published in some obscure newsletter. They were published in the journal Nature.
Yes, Nature.
Which, for anyone not deep into the science world, getting a paper published in Nature is like winning the Super Bowl of academia. It is one of the most prestigious, ruthlessly peer-reviewed scientific journals on the planet.
The weight of that really cannot be overstated. Nature publishing their data meant that the methodology was sound enough that the broader scientific community was forced to look at it.
Because Targ and Puthoff reported statistically significant results.
Right, result of perception occurring under controlled conditions where all conventional sensory input was completely restricted.
So it wasn't just a fluke.
No. And around that same time, you also have the work of Jacobo Grinberg, a prominent Mexican neuroscientist who tried to build the theoretical physics model for how this was happening.
Yeah, the sources mention Grinberg's informational fields. What exactly does that mean in the context of the brain?
So Grinberg developed what he called the synergic theory. He proposed that space is not empty, but rather a complex holographic matrix of information.
A matrix, okay.
Yeah, and he theorized that human perception is the result of an interaction between the brain's neural field and this broader informational field.
So the brain is tapping into this invisible field?
Essentially, yes. If a person's brain is highly coherent and deeply focused-like, the states trained in MindSee Grinberg argued it could directly interact with this field to extract visual information without needing the physical eye as a middleman.
That is wild.
The MindSee booklet notes this remains an exploratory theoretical framework, not an established physical law, but Grinberg's work successfully bridged hard neuroscience and consciousness studies.
Which brings us directly to the present day. Because MindSee isn't just relying on theoretical models from the 70s, they are actively submitting their program to modern clinical scrutiny.
Right.
The sources outline an ongoing research protocol led by a Dr. Jeff Tarrant.
And this is where the methodology gets incredibly tight. Dr. Tarrant is leading an exploratory study under an institutional review board, or IRB, which ensures strict ethical and scientific standards.
So it's very official.
Very official.
Yeah.
It's a minimal risk study for participants aged 8 to 75, involving a single visit taking about 60 to 90 minutes.
But testing this kind of thing seems like an absolute logistical nightmare. I mean, the first thing any skeptic is going to say is they are just peeking down the bridge of their nose.
Of course.
How does the lab actually prove they aren't seeing light?
They employ extremely rigid sensory leakage controls. This isn't just, a sleep mask from an airplane.
Right.
They use custom-designed, completely opaque blackout masks. And in many of these types of clinical setups, researchers will even use swimming goggles entirely filled with opaque silicone and then physically tape the edges to the participant's face with medical adhesive to ensure zero light enters.
Wow, they actually tape it to their face.
Yeah. And they also monitor the participants with multiple camera angles to ensure no physical manipulation of the mask.
Okay, so sensory leakage is completely locked down. What are they actually measuring once the lights are out?
Well, they're looking at 3 core variables. First, behavioral accuracy. Can the trained participants identify visual targets like colors or shapes on a screen above statistical chance under those strict blackout conditions?
Makes sense.
Second, subjective experience themes. Do the participants describe similar internal physiological sensations when a successful perception occurs?
Like, does it feel the same for everyone?
Right. But the third metric is the anchor of the whole study: quantitative EEG or key EEG mapping.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. They are mapping the brainwaves in real time while it happens.
Exactly. Key EEG involves placing a cap of highly sensitive electrodes all over the scalp to measure the electrical activity of the brain. They're looking at specific frequencies.
Like alpha waves.
Yeah, alpha waves for relaxation, theta waves for deep internal focus, and gamma waves for high-level cognitive binding. The study compares the participants' key EEG brainwave patterns during standard open-eye viewing of an object against their brainwave patterns while successfully perceiving an object with the blackout mask secured.
So they are looking to see if the visual cortex physically lights up on the monitor when the eyes are glued shut.
Exactly.
I mean, you have this concept, seeing in the dark, perceiving without eyes, that for thousands of years was purely the domain of mysticism, philosophy, and ancient monks sitting in caves. And now today, we have participants sitting in sanitized labs with key EEG caps literally wired to their heads, mapping the exact microvoltage frequencies required to do it. We are using the most advanced neurological technology we possess to measure one of the oldest mysteries of the human mind.
It's a remarkable intersection, and MindSee sits right in the middle of that intersection, applying these lofty principles practically.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, whether or not the mainstream scientific community fully adopts these claims this year or next decade, this rigorous testing of neural oscillations and cross-modal plasticity pushes the absolute boundaries of how we understand human potential.
It really expands what we think is possible.
They are demonstrating that when the brain is given the right conditions, profound safety, regulated nervous systems, and hyper-focused attention, its capacity to adapt and perceive is far greater than our traditional educational models account for.
It really reframes everything we think about how humans learn and process reality. So, to recap the journey we've been on today for you listening, we've explored the MindSee booklet, unpacking a program that treats blindfold vision not as a parlor trick, but as a trainable perceptual muscle.
Right.
We looked at the underlying mechanics, detailing how a deeply regulated nervous system, combined with the brain's natural plasticity, might allow us to reroute auditory and tactile information into the visual cortex through cross-modal perception.
And we've seen how the educational approach has to shift entirely between children who rely on open play and adults who have to actively dismantle decades of skepticism, performance anxiety, and the stress of self-evaluation just to reach the starting line.
Yeah, that baggage. And we trace the history from the Soviet dermo-optical studies to the groundbreaking 1970s Stanford remote viewing experiments published in Nature, all the way to modern, meticulously controlled PET brain mapping.
It's been quite a journey.
But the core takeaway from the MindSee text is that all progress is valid. Whether a participant achieves full blindfold vision or simply walks away with deeper emotional calmness, sharper focus, and an upgraded ability to step out of fight or flight, that is a massive victory for their quality of life.
Because ultimately, this entire endeavor is about expanding the flexibility and resilience of the human mind.
Which leaves us with a lingering question. If this training suggests that our brains can literally be taught to process the visual world without our eyes, simply by calming the nervous system and intensely redirecting our internal attention, what other dormant sensory abilities might you be walking around with right now, completely unaware, just waiting for the exact right kind of focus to finally unlock them?